How technological advancements have changed the way we access and consume information, like going to the library, for example. Now, information is available at our fingertips, but research shows that communities still have a dire need for guided learning, shared community spaces, and access to appropriate reading material. So, is there room for traditional libraries in the digital age? Let's discuss this with Esha Mansingh. She is a board member of the Imperial and Motus Community Trust. Thank you so much, Esha, for joining me this evening. I was sitting actually with a friend a few days ago at one of the restaurants there at Nelson Mandela Square. And she was looking up and she saw a library, a sign for library, Santon Library, if I'm not mistaken. And I didn't know that there's a library that actually, exists there. And I was very surprised. And the question obviously naturally came up, do people actually still go to libraries, and how relevant is it, in this day and age?
Hi, and good evening, Barron, and to all your viewers as well. So I think, we need to take a step back in terms of our landscape and look at the broadest South African landscape. And, just to maybe start with some alarming stats from a recent international survey, that over 80% of our grade 4 learners in South Africa cannot read with understanding. And I think just using that as the landscape tells us immediately that going back to the traditional methods of the good old books and the library is a much needed resource for us in South Africa, and particularly in our previously disadvantaged communities. We see a lot of need for that. And, I think for many of us that have easy access to digital iPads and can consume reading through technology, that's all fine and well. But what we find is that more and more youngsters are requiring support and assistance to go back to basics and start to read, to understand. And then only can we start to consume the information. So, in our world, it may not be as relevant as it was before, but for most of South Africa, there's definitely a need.
Yeah, I was actually going to bring up that study where it was found that our grade 4 learners in South Africa, they can't read to comprehend. As you just said, it's very important, to note that, there is an issue here somewhere, And now, I'm thinking, what's the role here of schools then when it comes to this? Teachers, but also parents. How do you make reading fun again for kids especially? And how do you carry on this tradition of reading and make it fun, but also realizing that it is important still for people to be able to read?
What we find is that in a lot of the schools in our local communities, the education system is under a lot of pressure. We see a large number of learners with very limited resources from a teacher perspective, and certainly no access to the traditional resource centers. And so I think that is the one challenge where we need interventions of, the corporate world and others that can come forward and make these resource centers available, which aren't as freely available in our community schools as we stand. And then when it comes to how do we keep the learners motivated and having fun, as you've mentioned, that is beyond just the role of the teachers at schools. We've employed librarians in our resource centers that we hand over, and they're actually youth from the local communities that don't only just go through the library programs, but also have exciting other initiatives in the library like board games, spelling competitions, and helping them to understand. And I always say to my kids that the best gift you can give to yourself is reading. And I think if that's the message that parents and teachers and communities can instill in our youngsters today, I think we're going to certainly have a brighter South Africa.
The scary thing is, it's not just kids, Esha, because a while back I also did an interview about approximately 300 KZN councillors who can't read or write, and these are leaders in communities. So, maybe, thinking creatively here now, libraries can then be, that access point for people in communities where they can go and not just take out a book to read, but also maybe that can be used as a center in communities to learn people how to actually read.
Absolutely. And I think, the magic about the resource centers that we currently put into schools are used as a community connector, if I might describe it as that.
Yeah.
Because again, it is about the involvement of the broader stakeholder universe. But as you've mentioned, the issue doesn't just sit with our young learners, right? I mean, we need to encourage the communities to get involved, and that's exactly what we do. We make it accessible over the weekends. We create the hype around it with the competitions, as I've mentioned. The only challenge has been, the COVID gap, when a lot of learners and schools, unfortunately, were closed and learners weren't able to access these resource centers. And hence, we saw a bit of a slump in the literacy stats, as we spoke about earlier. But I think from there on, we're trying very hard to open more resource centers in Gauteng and making this more accessible. And I think the other point I just want to add is that, the literacy rate among older people needs to be fixed, and we fix it with the younger generation. And that's our motivation through these resource centers, that we start at grassroots level, most importantly. And hopefully then from our primary schools that we're currently having the resource centers made available at, that we then go on to the feeder secondary schools, because ultimately, it doesn't end when you leave primary school. We have to ensure there's sustainability of these resources and of the literacy programs that we have, and that once, the learners are out of school with the library, that it doesn't end there for them. So hence, your point on it being a community resource is very, very important, and that's what we aim to do as well.
Thank you so much. That's all we have time for right now. Esha Mansingh from the Imperial and Motus Community Trust. Just, highlighting the importance, that it is important for not just kids, but also grown-ups to understand the importance of reading. And, the question is, do libraries still not just exist, but what's the importance of libraries in this day and age, this digital day and age? And I think it is quite important, for these libraries to still exist in some kind of way, maybe modernize them again and make them accessible for people so that they can, be taught how to not just read and write, but also, read with comprehension, or to comprehend.